You know that old song, "We Built This City on Rock and Roll"? Well, I'm not sure exactly what that would look like, but I love that song. I love its enthusiasm because in this lab, you know what we're going to do? We're going to build this NSX on controllers and ESXi hosts. So to make that happen, we're going to deploy the NSX controller, and then we're going to get our ESXi hosts actually configured to integrate with the NSX controller instructions. To continue the hands-on portion of getting our NSX installation complete, we're going to be using the hands-on lab from VMware 1903-01-net, VMware NSX Data Center for vSphere getting started. So we'll go ahead and click on that to launch it. I've already launched it, so I'm going to be resuming it. If you haven't, then you can simply enroll and start it. Once that's opened up, let's take a look at page 17 of the manual and follow the link to open up the second interactive simulation. Once that's loaded up, we can go ahead and hide the notes because we're going to be working through this together. You can always review those later if you'd like. Right on, right on. So we're here in the vSphere web client, and we have our NSX Manager appliance installed and initially configured, but we need to further configure our environment. To do that, we're going to use NSX Manager through the vSphere web client. We do that by clicking on the Home drop-down menu and then going to Network and Security. So let's click Network and Security. Make that the phrase that pays, something to remember. Networking and security equals NSX. That is all you will find here. There's a great dashboard to start us off, which is going to be amazing when it comes to troubleshooting. But right now, we need to get the installation furthered along. So we're on the left-hand side, we're going to click Installation and Upgrade. As we can see, we have our NSX Manager deployed. Now we're ready to get to the second portion of our centralized management and software-defined networking, the NSX Controller Node. So let's go ahead and click on that second sub-tab under Management, NSX Controller Nodes, and then click Add. What we're going to do is actually create new controller VMs in the management cluster that are going to support our needs for distributed networking. We're already associated with the correct NSX Manager. If there was more than one, we may need to make sure we were selecting the correct one. And now we need to put in a controller password. It has a 12-character requirement, so we're going to go ahead and put in the password of VMware1 exclamation point, VMware1 exclamation point with a capital VM in each one of those. We'll type that in the password and confirm password fields. And then we'll click Next. Now we need a name for this controller. So the name for the controller, we'll put in controller-01. It's already in the correct data center. Then we'll select the cluster, and which do we want? From the drop-down menu for the cluster or resource pool, we can see the two clusters available. We'll choose the management cluster. Unfortunately, in this simulation, it has you click the compute cluster, but you can see once it's selected, it's the management cluster that we want, not compute, when it comes to deploying our controllers. For physical storage, we'll use the drop-down menu for the data store, and we'll choose the region A01 iSCSI management storage. We don't need to choose a particular host or folder. We'll allow those to be default selected, but we will click on Select Network in order to connect it to the correct distributed port group. So we'll scroll down. There's a distributed port group already created for region A01DS-MGMT. That's our distributed port group for management, so we'll select that, and then we'll click OK. That's going to put it on the same network as the NSX Manager. Let's select an IP pool. An IP pool function similar to DHCP. It's going to be a way to automatically assign a valid IP address to these virtual devices. So we'll click Create New IP Pool. In the blank for the new IP pool, we'll type in the name controller-IP-pool. Then we'll click in the gateway field and put in the IP address of 192.168.110.1. We'll click for the prefix length and we'll type in 24. We'll click in the primary DNS field and point to our DNS server at 192.168.110.10. Then we'll click in the DNS suffix field and type in corp.local. Then we'll click the Add button in the bottom left. We'll click in the blank for the IP address range and put in 192.168.110.110.33. That's only 3 IP addresses, but the controller cluster always consists of 3 nodes, so that's the perfect range to work with for the 3 controllers that we'll deploy. We can press Enter, and then we can click the Add button in the bottom right. Now that the pool's been created, we'll select it, and then we'll click OK. And now that pool is indicated in the Deployment Connectivity dialog box, and we can click Finish. And now a new controller appliance has been deployed by the NSX Manager into our cluster. We're going to repeat this process quickly for a couple more controller nodes. So let's click Add. Then we'll click Next. We'll click in the blank for the name and type in controller-02. Then we'll click in the cluster resource pool and choose Management. We'll click in the data store field and choose the ESXi for management. We'll click Select Network and we'll choose the Region A01 distributed switch for management. Click OK. We'll click Select IP pool and select our controller IP pool and click OK. Then we'll click Finish. Let's go ahead and click Add one more. We'll click Next. Click in the controller field and type in controller-03. We'll click in the cluster resource pool and choose Management 01. Click in the data store drop-down menu, choose the ESXi, select Network, choose the management network, click OK. Select the IP pool, select the controller IP pool, click OK, and click Finish. We now have our controller cluster deployed. In this simulation, this process was instantaneous. Real world, it takes 5 to 10 minutes to actually bring up our controller. You might have also noticed that the first controller asked us for that VMware password, but that controllers 2 and 3 did not require a password. That's because it's a cluster, and so they all share the same common password. Let's click on Host Preparation, and now we're ready to add the NSX components to our clusters. Not to individual hosts, even though it says host preparations, the NSX Manager components are deployed at a cluster level. So we'll click on the Actions drop-down menu next to the Region A01 Compute cluster, and we'll choose Install. It asks if we're sure, we say yes, and now it's adding those distributed components to that cluster. On the left-hand side, we're going to go ahead and select the management cluster as well, and also install those same components. We'll choose yes. Notice that it was not required to install the NSX components into the management cluster, but if we do, then we can have the benefits of software-defined networking and firewalls to everything in the management cluster as well as the compute cluster. Now on the left-hand side, let's go ahead and switch back to the compute cluster. And from the drop-down menu for Actions, we can configure VXLAN. Now we are at the host level looking at the concept of VXLANs. And so what we're doing is defining the kernel properties. How will ESXi provide the ability to be an endpoint or a VTEP, VXLAN tunnel endpoint, for the various virtual machines that share the same VXLAN? So first we see this switch, Region A01 VDS Comp. So this is the Compute Cluster Distributed Switch Port Group. This is going to be what provides the transport for the VXLAN content that's going to be encapsulated and ride on top of that. If necessary, if we need to identify our own VLAN because we're using 802.1q connectivity with our physical switch, then we can identify that, but again, that's just for the transport content. The MTU default is 1600. Remember that that is a minimum for the transport network, the physical switches that are going to be interconnecting our ESXi host because of that encapsulation. It could be larger if we'd like. 1600 is the supported minimum from vSphere. How will we put an IP address on these VTEP endpoints? We could use DHCP, or in this case, we're going to once again use an IP pool, meaning it's going to be governed by NSX. So we'll select IP pool. We'll click to create a new IP pool. And the name for this IP pool is going to be VTEP-pool-region A01. We'll click in the gateway field and type in 192.168.130.1. That's our default gateway. We'll click in the prefix length, that's 24. We'll click in the primary DNS field and point to our DNS server at 192.168.110.10. And we'll click in the DNS suffix field and type in corp.local. Then we'll click Add for the IP range and click in the IP address field. And the range is 192.168.130.51-192.168.130.56. Let's go ahead and press Enter, and then we can click Add. Now that IP pool is selected. We can confirm that there in the drop-down menu, VTEP pool region A01. The teaming policy is set to failover, and the VTEP number is 1. Let's go ahead and click Save. Our communication channel is now up, because we actually have support for the devices to communicate with one another. But that's just for the compute cluster. We need our management cluster to also have that same support. So we'll select the Region A01 management. Once again, click Actions and configure VXLAN. From the drop-down menu for the switch, we'll choose Region A VDS Comp. All the same configuration is already in place and ready to be used. We can click Save. And now we see VXLAN support available for both the compute and the management cluster. In other words, all the nodes in both clusters now support being a VTEP with all the other nodes. If we scroll down in the bottom right and scroll to the right and click View Details for the VMK NIC for ESXi 05A, we can see that one of those assigned IP pool addresses is in place. In other words, all these nodes have assigned IP addresses for the VM kernel support of being a VTEP. Now we're ready to go up to the top two logical network settings. The VXLAN settings allow us to specify the VXLAN port for communication, just in case there's any firewall issues, and most importantly, it's where we're going to define our segment IDs. So just like you would define VLAN numbers, this is where we define our VXLAN numbers. So let's click the Edit button for segment IDs. So let's type in 5000-5999. We're going to leave multicast addressing off and then click Save. But now we need to indicate the transport zone. So let's click on the Transport Zone tab. Then let's click the Add button. We'll click in the name box and type in region A0-global-TZ. Our replication mode is going to stay unicast, which adds a little bit of extra work to the control cluster but reduces the amount of traffic being used on the physical network. Then we'll scroll down and we're going to put a check mark in both clusters. We'll click Add in the bottom right. So we've defined the available VNIs, VXLAN network identifiers that can be used when we create our logical switches, our logical network segments. And now we've created transport zones to indicate that anytime we create a logical switch in this transport zone, it's going to be available to both clusters that are participating in this transport zone. Currently, though, there are no logical switches. Everything that we've done has been about defining boundaries, but we have not actually created anything that is available to be connected to by a single virtual machine. This is all infrastructure, virtualized infrastructure creation. On the left-hand side, let's click the dashboard. Here on the dashboard page, we can see we've got a healthy NSX manager, 3 functioning controller nodes, no failover necessary right now, everything's all happy and green. The vSphere ESX Agent Manager, or EAM, is the external component being referenced here, and it's great that that's up and running because that's going to be the element that, for example, prevents you from shutting down a VM that is needed by VMs that are using that agent. So this is going to help to ensure the safety of our NSX configuration. That takes us to the end of this initial installation and configuration of the NSX infrastructure here in this lab. So just by way of quick recap, in this lab, we connected into the vCSA web client and opened up networking and security, which is really the way that we're able to access the elements of the NSX manager. In that NSX manager, we deployed not 1, not 2, but 3 controller nodes, which are just virtual machines that we attached to our ESXi management cluster and physically placed on our shared iSCSI storage. Once those controller clusters were created, we were ready to add the NSX components into each of our ESXi nodes and set up support for VTEPs so that all the ESXi nodes would have the ability to tunnel to each other over the transport network that was available to them. We also defined the range of VNIs to be from 5,000 to 5,999 and indicated that the management and the compute cluster both belong to the same transport zone and could therefore facilitate VXLAN communication between any VM in any of those clusters. Also along the way, in order to facilitate the IP addressing of the controller nodes and of the VTEPs, we created a couple of IP pools to ensure consistent IP addressing on each of those nodes. Wasn't anything really wacky or crazy in this configuration. This is really just the bare bones beginnings to set up the infrastructure so that we can start doing fun stuff like actually setting up switches and routers and firewalls and all the things that we're dreaming of down the road. But we've got to get the infrastructure in place to support those needs. I highly recommend reviewing this lab before you go in and start setting this up in your own environment so that you're clear about each of these different pieces and the purpose that they serve. I hope this has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.